All right. Well, for those of you who are joining us, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening. I imagine this will be an interesting session. We have some great guests tonight. Whether you are actively planning to start a business in the US, or if you're considering it as an option one day, maybe post-graduation, if you're a current student, or on OPT, if it's like around the corner and you're like, I just hate working for the man, I want to do my own thing. Hopefully this session will provide some interesting and useful tips, both on the immigration options that you have available if you're in F1 status, as well as strategies for success on a local level. So we have two wonderful guests tonight. Our first speaker is Mandi Bucceroni, who is going to speak to the immigration piece, and Beth Lawrence, who will talk about the strategies on a local level piece. So she has experience in the startup advising space in Philly. So I'm going to start with a fun fact of my own, which is that in the year 2018, nearly a quarter of the billion-dollar companies in the US had a founder who first came to America as an international student. And you can see from some of the logos I selected on the right here, some pretty big names. So not many people might know that Elon Musk is actually a former international student. I've tried to reach out to him to get him to speak at events, and he has not yet been in touch, but he's quite busy with Twitter wars right now. And companies like Moderna have surged to the forefront of the news in recent years for obvious reasons. Eventbrite, which my organization uses all the time, is actually one of the co-founders was an international student. Robinhood, another darling of the media in recent years, co-founded by international students. So there's a lot of promise for students who come here from other countries when it comes to entrepreneurship and getting into business, but it's not necessarily the most straightforward thing to do. So I'm going to hand over to Mandi, who will talk a little bit about the immigration options. Before I let Mandi get started, I will mention that we do have in this Q&A mode, you should be able to submit questions through the Q&A function, or you can put things in the chat if you just have an interesting comment to add. We may not get to questions until the end, but we should have about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for questions from the audience. So yeah, thank you for joining again. And Mandi, are you ready to take the reins?
Yes, I am. Thank you. So as Bill said, my name is Mandi Bucceroni. I'm an immigration attorney. Pretty much all of my focus is on immigration. And so I'll talk about F1 status a little bit, about options after F1 status and going on with that. So next slide, Bill. Okay, so I just want to remind all of you about some of the basics, as most of you are on F1. I'm sure you do know these, but I always love to remind students about this. So you do need to be you're in the United States for the purpose of studying and pursuing a course of study at an institution that is recognized in the United States. Having sufficient financial support, being proficient in English, or receiving training to become proficient, you have the intent to depart at the United States when your status is once you finish your program. And that intent, obviously, yes, many students do finish in F1, they finish their degrees and then go on to other statuses, stay in the United States and continue on and stay here maintaining status as well as legally living in the United States, and that can happen. You do need to make sure you are maintaining a full course of study, which is 12 credit hours in the fall and winter semesters. Summer, they are a little bit more lenient, and that you have sufficient academic credentials, so making sure you're attending class and doing well. So I just like to always point out these basics of F1s, because sometimes people do get a little focused on other aspects and forget about the basics of F1, and then you could find yourself into some immigration trouble, which with an F1 reinstatement can be a little tricky. So next slide, Bill. Okay, so F1 and working, I want to make sure, so there are, you aren't really allowed to work on an F1, and the only ways that you can work are with CPT or OPT, curricular practical training or optional practical training. With the F1, you get the 12 months usually, and you do get the 24 months in a STEM program. And so you do want to make sure with CPT that you are, if you're working on campus, what you're working in, what area, how are you full-time or part-time? All of these things do play a role into making sure whether or not you'll have work authorization at the end of your F1. As most students like to do is to save their OPT until they complete their degree so that they have that additional year, or in a STEM situation, 2 years, of work authorization in the United States after you complete your degree. I put in here about timing because it's so important to make sure that you plan out accordingly. It does take about 3 months, give or take, with the work authorizations. Right now, we've been seeing it a lot slower, starting to pick up again, but you do want to work with your DSO with your work authorization to make sure that you get it in the proper timing. The most important thing to take here from the F1 and work issue is that you are not allowed to work on the F1 unless you have the OPT or CPT. So you have to be very careful with that. And that will play a role with your entrepreneurship. If you create a business, things of that, you cannot work unless you do have lawful OPT. So making sure about that. And again, your timing issue, I always tell students, make sure you plan accordingly with H-1Bs, which we'll talk about shortly, that you want to make sure you plan, that you have the time, and that when you plan for your OPT, that you do get your you want to get that full year in. So you want to kind of line up your employment and work out those dates and plan accordingly. So maybe work with your end date in mind and then work backwards. And also the most important thing is obviously making sure you do communicate with your DSO, because you do want to make sure that you do get your OPT to be able to use the whole time, but also to make sure that you apply within the time period that you are allowed. So that communication piece is going to be really important. Next slide. All right, so some options after the F1. I'm going to go over a basic overview. I'm not going to get into a lot of the nitty gritty here because everything is really case by case basis. And I know a lot of people in immigration will always say to me, oh, well, my friend had this and it's the same exact case. And they're not, because there's always one little thing. So I would always say consult with an immigration attorney is your most important thing to do, who can give you guidance and properly advise you on these issues. So some options after F1 of working. So you have the E1, E2, which is the treaty trade visas. Those are specific to countries. There is a listing of them all. I'm not going to go over all of them. E1 is specifically with trade, so doing trade with that trading with that country. E2 is the investor, and that is specifically with investing a certain amount of money, creating that business, and then investing in the United States. And you do need to meet the country criteria, which again is out there. H-1B, well known as the bachelor's visa. So every year there are 65,000 H-1B visas, and then an additional 20,000 visas for those who have a U.S. master's degree. And those visas have a start date of October 1st. You apply by April 1st, but now they've changed it. So now we have the lottery system, which starts in March. And usually you are notified if you win the lottery by April 1st, give or take, sometimes March 30th, 31st, right around there. The H-1B visa does require a bachelor's degree, as well as, so the individual has to have a bachelor's degree, as well as the job itself has to require a bachelor's degree. And that has been playing the lottery in the past 2 years we've been playing the lottery a little bit more often. So those 85,000 total visas have not been used up on the first try. They had about 2 or 3 lotteries drawings, I think, with the 2020 and with 2021. This last year in 2022, we only had 1 time pretty much. So in most years, we see about 190, maybe 200,000 applications for those 85,000 spots. So it is truly playing the lottery. You do want to plan with the H-1Bs. About now would be your timing if you're graduating in the spring to start working out the details with the H-1Bs and what you can do with those. The L1A and L1B, so those are intercompany transfer visas. One is dealing with multinational managers and executives, whereas L1B deals with specialized knowledge. Those visas deal with companies. So there is an entity abroad that is linked to an entity here in the United States. They can be a parent subsidiary, affiliate, joint venture, all of those different options. And the individual has to have worked for the company abroad within 1 year out of the last 3 years. And so a lot of times these deal with companies that are abroad, starting new offices here in the United States, and provide various different options as to how to go about dealing with those businesses. The O1 is for those with extraordinary ability. There's a list of criteria and you only need to meet 3. A lot of it, some of the bigger ones I would say deal with judging the work of others, citations, producing scholarly articles. You can also, the research and work that is done out there, it is available to those in the arts, sciences, business, as well as performance areas as well. TNs are for those who are citizens of Canada and Mexico, and those are specialty occupations as well, similar to the H-1B, but specific to those who are from Canada and Mexico and meet specialty occupations that are listed. There's also the E3, which I didn't put on here, but those are for individuals who are from Australia. They have their own cap for the H-1B. National interest waivers, doing work of national interest that you can work to get the visas. And then there's always working towards the permanent residency option. These are all non-immigrant visas, so would give you the timing with businesses and then eventually lead to down the road could lead to permanent residency in the United States, which I'm not going to go over that portion of it because those get very specific as to depending on degrees and the industry and what's going on with each case. Again, a lot of it's all about timing. It's very important to plan out, if you're starting your business, when you plan to start it, when you plan to incorporate, how you want to do things. All of those things are very important. These are all visas that you can work on. And so you do want to be careful with when you start your business and then when you start working with your business. So incorporating a business is very different than being an employee of a business. So again, it all goes with timing, and that's realistically what a lot of these options are going to be. And Bill, I think my next slide is questions, which we're going to hold off to the end, but I did give you my contact information as well. So I know I ran through a lot of it, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end if any come on in.
Thank you, Mandi. That was helpful. Yes, if folks want to put questions for Mandi in the Q&A, Mandi, you could also keep an eye on that if you want.
Yeah.
Or you can save them until the end if you want the bigger picture. I'm going to stop sharing. And Beth, are you ready to share your screen?
I am.
Okay, perfect.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful Zoom question. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Beth Lawrence. I am a certified meeting professional, CMP. I am an event planner. I am also a business owner. I own Beth Lawrence and Company. We are an event and meeting planning company based remotely. I'm in Collingswood, New Jersey, right outside of Philadelphia, and I serve clients all over the world. I'm also a podcast host. I'm the host of the Type A Plus podcast, where I give bite-sized tips each week to help balance your work and life even during your most hectic times. And I'm also a startup advisor. I've worked for organizations in Philly that I will introduce tonight. And I have also volunteered my time throughout my career to help other business owners move forward. So the first thing I'll cover is what makes Philly a good home for startups. And there's a lot of different reasons. Startup Genome actually named Philly the 11th startup ecosystem in the US this year, and also 27th in the world, which is huge for our pretty small city. And the innovation ecosystem has been really growing exponentially for decades, and that's really due to a lot of the organizations that I'll share with you tonight. So the first reason that Philly is a great place for startups is the location, the physical location. We have such an ease of travel between so many major metropolitan cities on the East Coast, such as New York, DC, and also going into Pittsburgh, going into Boston, up to Boston as well. It's really, really accessible by train. We have a lot of different ways that you can get to these cities, and it's all extremely easy. It's also an innovation hub. So it's the headquarters of some of the largest companies, not only in education and medicine, which is really what Philadelphia is known for, but also food innovation, hospitality, and so much more. We have companies like Aramark and Bimbo and Nabisco and Campbell's. They're all located right in this area. So there's a lot of space for innovation. We're also a very good test market because we have a very low cost of living comparatively with these other cities that I mentioned, with a lot to do. We still have a lot of culture and a lot of fun in our city. So it makes it a really fun place to live while you're launching your business. And for networking reasons. So we have a lot of networking opportunities here, and networking is something that I have done my whole career in Philadelphia specifically. So we have a lot of broad networking groups and also industry specific networking opportunities here. We also have now a lot of virtual, hybrid, and in-person opportunities to take advantage of. You can also in Philly really take advantage of an on-the-ground marketing style. So for example, I worked for a startup in 2015 to 2017 called Snap Kitchen. It was out of Austin, Texas. I was a director of marketing for the region. I helped launch not only the market itself, but 9 stores and also the mobile app. And we had no budget. We were rebranding at the time, so we didn't even have any collateral. And I had 5 stores I had to open within a month. So it was the middle of January, and I gave my team literally a list of small businesses along the same corridor where we were opening our retail locations. And I had them go and introduce themselves, talk about their business, exchange information. And then we did that same exact route as soon as we had collateral. And then we did the same thing again right before we opened. And it was the most successful market outside of Texas because of that. And Philly also has just a culture of cooperation toward a common goal. And that brings me to the culture. So we have the 6th largest workforce here, which is something that's really not well known. But there's a lot of individuals in this ecosystem that are really prepared to work. And we also have a culture of how can I help? It's a lot more of a small town feel compared to New York City. So we always say that, New York is 5 boroughs, right? But Philly is kind of like one of those boroughs. It's really tight knit, but there's still, as I mentioned, a ton to do. And, we're an underdog city in a lot of ways. A lot of people thought of us for a while as like New York City's younger brother, younger sister, younger sibling. And we've just proven time and time again with being #1 on, cities to visit, with all of this press with our startup ecosystem and with our innovation ecosystem. There's a lot going on here. So I'll now kind of go do a brief overview of all of the key players in our ecosystem. As I mentioned, it's going to be a brief overview. I'm happy to share this deck with you, Bill, afterwards with folks or at least the information on this, if you all want to follow up and get more info. So I used to work for Philly Startup Leaders. It is a nonprofit organization that's mission is to help current and future founders succeed in Philadelphia and beyond. They have free programming, both in person and virtually. They have an accelerator program. There's a number of different ways that you can connect with them, which I'll get to a little bit later. PACT is another, small nonprofit membership organization. They have a lot of pitching competitions. They have a lot of industry specific focused events. So it's a great place for you to look. Philly Startup Leaders is really for idea to growth stage founders, and then PACT is for those later stage founders that are raising Series A, Series B. Startup Bucks, they have great programming like Founders 30, where you can go and pitch to a group of anywhere from 20 to 60 people on a Wednesday morning at, I believe it's 8:30 virtually, and you just get feedback about your startup. Makers Meetup, that's usually for folks who have physical products, tangible products. I should say Philly Startup Leaders and PACT really are for tech-enabled businesses. Then we have Angel Venture Fair, Independence Business Alliance. So Angel Venture Fair is more of a financial pitching competition, again, where investors get to see the startups that are exciting in the ecosystem. Chamber of Commerce and the Independence Business Alliance are a similar thing. So the Independence Business Alliance is the LGBTQ Chamber of Commerce in Philly, very tight-knit community, very, very supportive. We also have Founders First Capital Partners, which is a wonderful partner that Philly startup leaders worked with, and also many, 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 as I mentioned, industry-specific networking groups like DeFi Philly, for example, that's in the blockchain space. If you're looking for accelerators, incubators, or programming like that, Philly Startup Leaders has the Founded in Philly program. There's one at Venture Cafe has a lot of free offerings that's physically in University City Science Center. Lift Labs is a wonderful resource here provided by Comcast. We also have On-Ramp Fellowship, which is for earlier idea stage founders. So, the Community College of Philadelphia offers the Power Up and the Scale Up programs, both of which I've been involved in as a coach. And it's a program with also one-on-one coaching afterwards. So it's pretty wonderful. And then Venture for America, which has presence all over the nation, but it's pretty plugged into the ecosystem here. And then for funding and advice, here's a list of some of the funders that I've worked with personally that are really helpful and always willing not only to, lend advice and be there along the way, but also if you're a right fit, provide funding. So Ben Franklin Technology Partners, Osage Venture Partners, and Glenmead are more, I would say, impact investing. And then Juno Capital Partners, Broad Street Angels, Robinhood Ventures, a lot of VCs, a lot of angels, and a lot of different funding organizations in Philadelphia and the surrounding area. This is just a list of some media to look out for. Technically writes a lot about the startup ecosystem in tech, so you could check that out. Philadelphia Business Journal has Inno, which is the innovation publication, and then Philly Mag, Philly Voice, so much more. But there's a lot of digital publications if you want to start to kind of see what the ecosystem is about. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are just a few success stories that have come out of Philadelphia. GoPuff is really revolutionized being able to get anything, anytime on your phone. Companies like Crossbeam and QuotaPath, they came directly through Philly startup leaders, and even some of them have been on the board. Grovara, Peter Groverman is one of the co-founders of Philly startup leaders. Lula Delivery came out of the Philly startup leaders. Founded in Philly Accelerator program, and so did Trabaja, as well as Employee Cycle. So the reason that I named all of these folks is obviously I have personal associations with them, but there are so many success stories, and that's where those media publications come in. Finally, how you all can plug into the network. There's a lot of opportunity here, but really in Philly, we're a very unique ecosystem in that you are the best marketing tool, right? So making yourself visible is a huge thing. And it's really easy now virtually to make yourself visible, whether you attend, something like the Lunch Club virtually to meet people all over the world, or whether you find a networking group in Philly. Here's just a few resources to get you started, or a few ideas on where you can find events and places to get plugged in. So I mentioned Philly Startup Leaders a bunch, but they have a free resource called connect.phillystartupleaders.org. And that really it's almost like a social media intranet for the innovation ecosystem. And you don't have to be physically in Philly to sign up. It's actually free for founders. So if you're a founder of a company or a student looking to get into entrepreneurship, that's really a great place to start. Looking at Eventbrite and Meetup pages in the Philadelphia area. I know that's where DeFi Philly started, and they have now over 800 members. So there's a lot of ways to get involved there. And then looking at community calendars for Technically and the other media that I mentioned, those are other great ways to start your journey here. And Philly really we're very, very helpful. We want to help. Philly wants to help Philly. Philly cares about Philly. And when you move here, when you establish a presence here, you become part of that. We want to welcome you and we want to help you succeed, because that's how our city is and that's how the people are, in my experience. So if you ever want to get into contact with me, I do, like I said, I've done events and programming. I've been a startup advisor for some time. Here's my email, my website. You can listen to the short form podcast, the Type A+ podcast, wherever you listen. And then feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Beth Lawrence, CMP, which again stands for Certified Meeting Professional. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, so I'll repeat that. If folks want to ask questions, you are welcome to put them either in the chat or the Q&A. So Mandi, I see you answered the question in the Q&A already, thanks. We do have, at least 10 minutes to answer some questions, so I can get the ball rolling actually. So Mandi, I had a question or two about specifically the experience from F1. So I guess I know I've heard a lot of misconceptions about people who have started or been interested in starting businesses from F1 status. Things like, oh, if I just volunteer with this company I'm co-founding, it doesn't really matter because I'm not earning any money, or mostly, or I'm doing it on OPT, so that's fine, but it's not on my CVS record. That would be another one. Are there any other misconceptions that you've come across that you always feel the need to correct because you're worried about people squandering their status?
There's always ones. I mean, I would say people think, oh, I've been going to class and I've paid my dues, so I'm still in F1 status. And I literally had a client who, was on F1 status and was paying his tuition and attending class and doing all these things. And next thing he knew, immigration was at his door. And the reality was he hadn't checked in with his DSO. And so there was a little button not clicked on the CVS record. So when I tell you to maintain your status and make sure, double check all those things, that's important, because maintaining your status for F1 is always going to become an issue later down the road when you want to change into your business and to another status, or to eventually having eventually going to a permanent residency. So it's really important to just maintaining that status, and it will always be. And as far as the volunteer question and working, those are very specific, and people think a lot of things. And I would also say, watch what you don't, be careful with what you listen to on the internet. There are a lot of YouTube videos out there that claim to know legal advice, and I promise you, most of those people did not go to law school or practice in this area, so they may not know what they're talking about. So just be careful is realistically what I can say. I see a bunch of questions here. I'm happy to read off to them.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm doing my master's in computer science. Can I start a business in any field or in only IT field? A business can be in any field. You need to, I'll let Beth talk about, relating your skills back to the business, but from an immigration standpoint, it's just going to be particular on uncertain visa options that are there. But if you are going to be a business owner and you want to invest money, as long as you meet certain criteria, you can do it in knitting if you really want to, if that's a hobby of yours.
Yeah, I will say I did a lot with I ran the accelerator programs at Philly Startup Leader. So we worked with founders that literally just had an idea on a napkin. You don't have to, the idea, I think that, obviously I'm not knocking education. I think it's phenomenal to get as much education as you possibly can, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're in a little box for the rest of your life. Everybody is a well-rounded human being and has a lot of interests and skills. And I would say that as long as you have enough passion and you have identified a market and a consumer, I think you can start a business, within all legal boundaries, in anything.
And so to also answer, just to go off on it, technology is the wave of the future. So you're always going to be able to use that IT, I think, in some way.
I might just chime in to say, if the student's asking about F1 status specifically, then I suppose, yes, you would need to be, as a former DSO, like this is the advice I would always give, you need to be able to relate your major degree field of study, which is what it says in the regulations, to the work you are doing somehow. So there's different ways you can do this. The advice I would usually give is just be confident that there is a clear link between what you're doing when you're in F1 status. This doesn't count for down the line if you change to H1B or come back as in L1 status or anything else. But in F1 status, if you're working in any field, it has to have some relevancy to the studies you pursued. So you just have to be able to, even if it's just drawing a line between the courses you took at the core of your program and the work you're doing. So I worked with students who were they studied biology, but they went into pharmacy. So it's kind of like, well, they're not exactly the same. You can show like obviously a lot of the courses you took studying biology really inform being a pharmacist or working in pharmacy, as an example. So that's just from the F1 perspective. If this student who asked about the IT field is a F1 is planning to start a business at F1 status, you'd have to make that that equivalent. Mandi, I think some of these other questions are aimed your way.
I see some of that. So starting a business overseas and monetizing, you can start the business. The tricky part becomes whether or not you are an employee, if you're working, and that gets a little in the gray area. So I would, I would suggest talking to a lawyer, because it really does get into this whole timing gray area as to when your business starts, when are you making money, what is your role in it, what's going on, all of these things. If it's overseas, you then could run into a tax issue here, which we may need to discuss. Like, do you have to file taxes here that you're earning an income? Those are a lot of the tricky things, and it goes into a broader issue. So I would suggest, if you're working on a business plan, it may be beneficial to consult with a lawyer and just make sure that you have everything in your dot your I's and cross your T's, I shall say, and making sure that you have everything down to a science, especially, you're working on your business plan. Let's make it happen. So those types of things.
Mandi, I might go back to your point too about remember what your visa demands that you're here to do, which is
Yes.
You have to focus on your studies and maintain your F1 status as a priority. But if you can legally start a business in your own country at the same time and you get source income from your own country, you may, as Mandi says, tax implications maybe, but yes, remember that F1 is your raison d'etre while you're here.
And a bunch of these have been about starting the business and about with revenue. Again, double checking everything, and let's see where you are in that portion. So starting a business, there's not a minimum investment. It really depends on the visa. I know a lot of people always think of the EB-5, which is the $1 million green card, which now has gone up in money even. With the E's, it's an unspoken rule of $100,000 investment, but there's the others, like an L, does not require an investment. So it really just depends on where things are. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that investing. So again, it comes down to very specifics in your case, and would be best to talk about those and talk about those options that are available to you. That one I answered. We answered that one. I'm just making sure I answer all of them. If you work on campus, can you create a business that primarily services people on campus? You can, creating that business, as they will say, if there's an opportunity to monetize, then create the business. There's plenty of options out there. So creating that business is not going to be specific to, or what that business is for. It is not specific to the F1 or to the immigration. It's dealing with, what your business can be, because eventually when you go to do some of these other options with immigration wise, they're going to want to see a business plan. They're going to want to see that the business is selling products or services, and that they're actually in the business of doing business, that they're actually doing business and can eventually have employees. Right away, it doesn't all have to, but those eventually would. So I think your question really was more, could you do that? And again, it goes back into how you're doing your business planning and when it's starting and what your actual role is going to be. Do you have to announce to someone that you are starting a business? Not technically, but then again, I would also go with, you are announcing in your own way by registering your company, whether you decide to incorporate or do an LLC or how you're doing it. It's public record. It's out there. They're going to know that a business is there. So you are technically announcing.
You'll get a bundle of mail right away to whatever address you register.
Exactly. And I'm going to make a blanket statement out there anyway. For those of you who are thinking about creating a business, whether you're trying to do it by yourself or you're going to do with friends or you're going to do with family or, whatever, consult with a corporate lawyer. Number one, because when you go to structure your business and how you want to structure it, you want to make sure you protect your investment, but And you want to make sure that you do it the most proper way too, because when you have to go backwards and try and set things up after it's already been set up, it may not be the best. And so a corporate lawyer can give you those options as to down the road, here's what's better for you tax wise, here's what's better for you liability wise, here's what's better in all of these aspects. So I know we're dealing more with entrepreneurship, and I deal with entrepreneurs all the time. I work with a corporate lawyer, a tax lawyer, just so that people can get all of those aspects and see what's the best option for you. And Beth, I know a lot of these are immigration focused, but if you want to chime in on anything.
No, I am going to leave that to the expert.
Can I start a business in a country that is not my own while on an F-1? So that would be, so that's a very interesting one, because you now would be running into what their immigration laws are and what they allow with work. So I would look into those options and seeing what does it mean to work in that country. What do you have to do for taxes? What do you have to do to have a business there? Those are specific things that I would look into. And while you're starting the business overseas, you do want to look into all those aspects to make sure you're doing it properly. And then eventually, you know, if your F-1 status becomes, you go on to an H-1B or an L or whatever you go on to, you're going to have to admit to those, having that business abroad, and then eventually your tax issues, which are always going to be. And so once you become a permanent resident in the United States, you are subject to worldwide taxation. So that's one of your fun aspects of, you know, you might have business elsewhere, but America wants to tax you on it. So you're going to have to deal with that. All right, so we answered that one. I know there are no stupid questions. Stupid questions are the ones that aren't asked. So we'll start with that. But does it mean I can start a business and hire myself? So if you can hire yourself and work on CPT, OPT, if it aligns with the study, that's a very tricky question, actually. And so it really gets into a lot of things, intricacies of the business. And that is something I would totally tell you, go consult with an immigration lawyer. Also, as Bill said, making sure that you talk with your DSO about your OPT and where you plan to actually be working on it. So a lot of them are going to want to work on those. And there's other options, you know, that may be better as well.
There's something I'd like to mention too, which is that if you think about the process of starting a business, there's a lot of work that goes into that, and you have to think about how that work that goes into starting a business could be construed by your DSO or by the government if they found out, because it's not like you're not working just because you're not earning money. And the way the government views what is work is not necessarily, oh, it's paid. So that's why you have to be very careful, and why the question of OPT is a good one. So on OPT, in order to report OPT employment, you don't have to be earning money. So in that regard, like, students have started business on OPT, but then you have to be able to report your hours in a standard way. You have to have some way of proving that you're doing the work if it's just you working. So these are kind of tricky questions, because especially if you haven't graduated yet, you're starting to work, but you don't necessarily have authorization to do it because you're starting a company. Maybe you're in an internship program or like a CPT enabled course that lets you do that, but still some tricky things that would really require some like good one-on-one consultations with, as Mandi said, you know, a corporate lawyer, but also an immigration attorney to advise on some of the tricky bits there of like, well, I'm technically working, but I'm maybe not authorized to do so. Is it work? What is work? I think that would be a question for an answer to for the person who asked about, can I start a business that could be on-campus employment? Because think about the amount of work you'd have to do to start that business before you could persuade the school to contract with you as an on-campus employer. Beth, I might chime in here to give you a couple of questions I had that I think people would benefit from. One of the things that I think international students always find hardest when they're here, you know, at a disadvantage to their peers who have been here for much longer, generally, some of whom grew up around here. It's a very Philly thing to grow up, to be born in Philly and stay living in Philly, and all your family's here and your whole network's here and you know literally everyone. But
stop talking about me, Bill.
I'm talking about you and maybe 80% of Philadelphians.
Yes.
Many of whom are my dear friends, but they just they have a distinct advantage over folks who come for a master's here for 2 years and then like, okay, now I need to compete with these people who have like the biggest networks of all time. So what are some, maybe do you have any sort of like good strategies for folks who are transplants, I know you have some great resources in terms of like places people can look, but like in terms of powering up your network and maybe strategizing who are some good people to have in your network, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, that's why I love like organizations like Philly Startup Leaders and things like that, where it's industry agnostic. They have a really low, it's a really low barrier to entry, right? So they have an event called the Welcome Wagon event, and it's quite literally for people who maybe are new to the startup ecosystem in Philly, even if you lived here for a long time. If you're a new founder, if you're a second-time founder, if you're just new to the ecosystem, if you're trying to just meet people, and they do a really good job of making you, like, for example, if you came into the Welcome Wagon and the people that work for PSL didn't know you or hadn't seen you before, they would actually go out of their way to say, hey, I see that you registered. Where are you coming from? How did you find out about us? Who are you trying to meet? And so that's why for me, finding those, experimenting, right? Looking at the calendars that I mentioned and finding all these different ways to get engaged, I think then you'll find your people. I always, on my podcast, I actually have an episode about network, type A plus networking, it's called. And I always say you try to diversify and find 5 different types of organizations to join. So it could be a geographic specific organization. It could be an industry specific organization. It could be a nonprofit that you're volunteering at. It could be just a self-help or self-interest and a shared interest organization. There's so many different types of organizations that you can join, and then really have intention, right? Like figure out who on the list matches the type of person that you want to meet, and then figure out who's running that event and ask them to introduce you to that person. That's why they're there. I actually recall at Philly Startup Leaders, I was just working the event, and there was a woman that came up to me in partnership with CDI Philadelphia. I don't know if you're familiar with CDI, but Citizen Diplomacy International, did a lot with them. And she just walked right over to me and said, hey, I think you're the one that runs this organization. I have this initiative that I wanted to talk to you about. And by the end of that 5-minute conversation, I was sending her a proposal that next week, and we had a conversation. And so that's what I mean also about thinking about Philly has that helpful culture. I know we're also a little bit tough to break into, but when you find those organizations that really function to serve as an ambassador between you and the rest of their membership, which just means people, right? People that have a common interest, that's really the key.
Yeah,
and just a little quick tidbit is get out there and network. I mean, I don't do a lot of marketing on my own business, and mine comes from word of mouth, and it's getting out there. It's meeting people who form a connection with you and then can introduce you to the right person. And so it's out there shaking hands, or maybe not after COVID, but like just out there getting to know people. And more importantly, and something that I never really thought of, was people would always say, know your elevator pitch. And I'd go, what? Like, you don't need, like, you have more than 10 seconds. And for the first time in my life this year, I was at a conference and I had 20 seconds to tell someone what I did, and I actually got business out of it. So like, know your elevator pitch, get out there and network. And you don't know who you can meet, because you're not always going to meet them, just sitting behind your computer or staying home. I always tell people, just get out there and meet people, because you don't know who could lead you to your next whatever client, networking person, investor, whatever it is.
Exactly.
And I think a lot of people think about networking just as building a network, like building essential allies for the next steps, but it's also about getting feedback on your ideas, which is honestly as crucial as strategizing your immigration path, because you need to know that you have a viable product that will succeed in the market before you worry about like, how can I stay here long enough to make it work? Because if you can't make the company stand on its own 2 feet, then you're not going to be able to stay anyway, because you're counting on your own company to sponsor your visa essentially in the long term.
Piggybacking off of that, Founders 30, which I mentioned, and 1 Million Cups, which I did not mention, are both 2 very, again, low barrier to entry. You just sign up to pitch at either 1 Million Cups or Founders 30, and you get to pitch your idea to folks. Obviously, you have to be accepted. You have to have a certain amount of traction with your idea, but it's a great way to get in front of people, and people are so engaged. Everyone is there volunteering because they care about the startup ecosystem and they want to see people succeed. So it's a great way to get yourself out there in front of a crowd without necessarily having to stand in front of people.
Yeah, and I
Absolutely.
would even say even now is more of a time to go network because people have missed some of that interaction. So if you're a little nervous even about getting out there and meeting people or seeing people, like there's people that are like, well, I haven't talked to a human in person in 2 years. I'm so excited to do this. So, get out there and just present yourself because you just don't know what you could find.
Absolutely, yeah. And I will use that to plug International House's events too. So if you're not on our mailing list, we are all about getting students and graduates to meet up and get in the same place together and have fun and network and build a friendship circle. So look us up if you haven't already. But I do see there are a few more questions, Mandi. I think these are probably aimed at you too. So there's one here that says, I was under the impression that as an undergraduate at college on an F-1 visa, I cannot start a business that brings in revenue. Could we go over this part again? I think we might have covered this.
We have, and so it's the business part is really talking about when you become an employee and when you're working. So it's very specific on all those things. It's not always, it doesn't always happen that you incorporate a business and the next day you're earning a paycheck. That's probably very rare that it happens. But so those are the things, and you need to talk about those things and coming up with your plan and where things are, because it's going to take some time to build a business. So you can possibly start it depending on where your revenue is and what you're doing with it and what's going on before it winds up becoming an issue where you're working for it. So again, that's a very tricky situation that I would say talk to a lawyer and put it in your planning. The next one actually was, so can you get a bank loan for a startup on an H-1B? Yeah. And Beth, maybe you want to talk about like ideas of how these entrepreneurs, startups can do with financing and investing.
So with finance, I am not the best person. I've done investment promises in the past, but I do know that there's several different ways to get funding. I know that there's a lot of banks, especially in Philadelphia, that are looking to really get involved in the startup community. And a lot of them will do like volunteer. Honestly, a lot of people will do like volunteer hours. So I would look at the like Venture Cafe and places like that, because they actually have one-on-one volunteer hours with real professionals who are in the business who could tell you, like I think someone from PNC and I think someone from TD Bank did it. And similarly with Scale Up and Power Up, they're individuals that aren't getting paid for their time, but they're there again because they care. So you can ask them questions either virtually or in person and get your answers. And I think PSL is starting to do some of those office hours type things too. The other resource that came to mind, I mean, law firms have a lot of good connections as well. So I would actually piggyback that back to you.
And there's a lot of different places where you can get capital and things like that. I think and maybe this is the route you're going down to, is would it be hard for you to get get a loan dealing with the whole Social Security issue? And you would have a Social Security, if you plan it out properly, you would get your Social Security number when you do your OPT, and then that would be your number for the rest of your life. So then once you transfer over to an H-1B, you could work with some banks that maybe are willing to work with startups and things of that nature. So again, they're very case specific. So, but there are options out there, I shall say.
I think a lot of international students feel a bit burned by the difficulty of getting student loans. And if you think about the difference between a student loan and a business loan, like the risk to the bank of a student loan is much bigger than if they give money to a business that they think is super viable, because all they care about is that they're going to get a return on their money that they lend to you. So if your H-1B visa is a cause for concern for them, it's about having a kind of a plan B and C and having other people in the company who would be able to show take it forward if you're not in the picture, or how you can show that how you would be in the picture if you weren't in this country, but you'll be working in an office in your home country, for example. So that's part of it too. Like the bank isn't going to care as much about your immigration status if you can make a good case for why it doesn't matter.
And that would be also again, that's back to building relationships. And so banks, like they have the personal side and the business side. You want to go to a bank that you have a little bit of a relationship with. So there are some smaller ones, there's bigger ones. Open up a personal account, like a savings or a checking, and then you can always, build that relationship. And if they see that, this person had this personal savings account for 5 years and now you started a business, the bank's also going to look at sometimes, they look at it, well, they can get a business account out of you, maybe a loan. It's business for them. So they also look at those things as well. So, those are some things you can even look at now while you're a student. And the passive income, again, it goes with a tax issue, how much you're earning, what's going on. Are you working? What are you doing? It's a very case specific question. And hopefully my answers are not frustrating you all by saying that it depends, because that's a classic lawyer answer. But it does depend on your specific situation, what's going on. It's not that we can't make some of these things happen. It's just very case specific and goes on to your own situation.
Just remember, if you're earning money from especially an app, I think someone mentioned YouTube, like there's a record of that money changing place somewhere. So even if you necessarily could dodge it, depending on how successful you get, there could be a day where, they realize, oh, okay, this is an income stream. I remember when I was on, this isn't exactly the same thing, but I was on unemployment and I got a $75 check and it was cut off immediately because it was like, well, and that wasn't my threshold, but that it can be like that where you don't have time to explain it.
Yeah, and you want to be careful with it because these days everything's tracked. So like they see your Venmos, they see all these things. You do want to be careful with these things because they will find it. And they do have access. And especially when your immigration status could be in jeopardy. All I say is that it's just so important to talk about it and be proactive, not reactive. Plan in advance, talk about it. Maybe we meet and you might have 3 years and I might say, okay, well, we're a little too soon, but I'd rather say like, it's too early rather than it's too late to do something. So, this is your future we're talking about. This is your livelihood. These are your, your money, whatever it is you're investing, your time, your energy, blood, sweat, and tears. So you want to plan accordingly and invest in that, because if you want your business to truly succeed, or this idea that you have as a business, plan accordingly and put the right tools in place so that it can be successful.
Absolutely. And there was one funding source that I forgot to mention that would be a great resource, and that's Ben Franklin Technology Partners. They really do a lot with office hours. They do a lot with, they say all the time, any event I've ever done with them, remember, we're here to help. We're here for questions. We're here for all of that. And a lot of investment groups will do that. They'll just help you and answer questions because, especially if they believe in you, people invest in people at the end of the day. It is the idea, but it's also the founder and it's being investable. And if the earlier you put yourself out there, the more you'll start to know people, and then your name will start to track between people that know one another. And that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I see we're coming up on 7 o'clock. So I'm just going to share this slide, which is basically our International House contact list slide. If you have any more questions for Mandi and Beth, now is your chance. But I want to say, while we're waiting, a huge thank you both to Beth and Mandi. I know you both had a busy, hectic week, and it's very kind of you to join and share your insights tonight. So thank you so much. And thank you to our audience for joining as well. I hope this has been helpful to you. And if you want to reach out to Beth and Mandi, they had their emails. They shared their emails in the slides. There will be a recording of this session on our YouTube channel very soon, so you can look them up there. And yeah, I think I see one more question came in. Oh, that's just a thank you. Oh, Priyal, that's very kind of you. All right, well, with that, I think we will wrap up. So once again, Beth, Mandi, thank you so much. I hope we can do this again.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It was a blast.